Death Taxes is a peculiar white-based legacy deck that aims to disrupt opponents through use of its mana taxing effects and also through its high-value, low-cost creatures. For players that don't know much about the legacy metagame, Death Taxes on the surface probably looks a lot weaker than its peers. It doesn't have a combo in it, it doesn't have powerful counters, and it doesn't even have discard. Instead, the game plan of Death Taxes is to use its creatures to delay the opponent from being able to execute their game plan, and to then use those creatures to chip away at the opponent's life. The mana base of Death Taxes is also designed to interact with your opponent's mana base to keep them off of it while you are chipping away at their life with your creatures. With very little card advantage and selection, it needs to ensure that every card it draws will be value and important to the game. Because of this lack of card advantage and selection, it means that you need to maximize the use of your creatures very efficiently. This means that if you want to be a strong Death Taxes pilot, you're going to need to know a lot of information about the general legacy meta. So let's get started by talking about its core creature base. It runs 4 Mother of Runes. This is often nicknamed Mom. You will very rarely be using her to attack. Instead, you will be using her to protect your fragile creatures, as the vast majority of removal in the legacy meta will hit all of your creatures. Wise opponents will usually kill her before her summoning sickness wears off. Now, while this is annoying, it does mean though that she has eaten an important removal spell, and your opponents are going to have to find more removal to hit your disruptive creatures. It runs 4 Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. This is an incredible card. Not only will it disrupt combo and tempo decks, but her first strike ability can often be extremely relevant in battle. She'll make efficient blue-based cards like Ponder and Brainstorm clunky and awkward to use, which will delay and slow your opponent down. She can even single-handedly shut off combos like the Omnitell Infinite Release the Ants combo and any Storm combo. Combined with your mana taxing effects, she can be absolutely devastating to your opponent. And of course, because Death Taxes relies on its creatures for most of its utility, she's going to be hitting you a lot less hard than she will be hitting your opponents. Even though she is a legendary creature, she is still run as a 4 because she is that backbreaking. Stoneforge Mystic is usually run as a 4, needing very little introduction. Stoneforge is Death Taxes' control finisher. Normally you will run 1 Jitte, 1 Sword of Fire and Ice, and 1 Batterskull for her to find. Phyrexian Revoker is normally run as either a 4 or sometimes as a 3. This is an extremely important card because it can shut down all sorts of other important cards in Legacy, including things like Liliana of the Veil or Jace the Mind Sculptor, or even your opponent's equipment. And you can use this to completely lock out a Sneak and Show player. If you use Phyrexian Revoker and name Sneak Attack and have a Karakas on the board, the Sneak and Show player will normally have no answers to this in the main deck and will have to go on to game 2. Serra Avenger is normally run as a 4 to 2. Now, she doesn't provide you with any utility. Instead, she is an extremely efficient flying beatstick that shines in Delver metas. Flickerwisp is normally run as a 3 to 4. In addition to its utility, it also provides an efficient flying beater. It is an extremely skill-intensive card that rewards deep knowledge of the legacy meta. It also greatly benefits from Aether Vial, arguably even more so than any other creature that you're running. Some uses for Flickerwisp include being able to use your Aether Vial in conjunction with a Flickerwisp to save your creature from your opponent's removal, exiling an opponent's land for a turn to disrupt their mana base, and you can even use it to reset your own Phyrexian Revoker so that you can pick a different card. And so that there is the core creature base that Death Taxes normally runs in its list. This normally accounts for between 20 to 17 creatures. But the normal Death Taxes lists allow for up to 26 creatures. This gives you between 9 to 6 flexi spots to fill out. Here are some other creatures that often see play in these flexi spots. Just a quick note, all of these optional creatures are meta dependent, so choose from them depending on what you expect to see in your meta. Sometimes 1 to 2 copy of Aethersworn Catalyst is run in this slot. Just like Thalia, she can completely shut down a lot of combos, like again the Omnitell Infinite Release the Ants combo and any Storm combo. Mangara of Corondor is sometimes run as a 1-off. Now this has a really nifty interaction with Karakas that you need to know about as a Death Taxes player. What you can do is you can activate Mangara and then hold priority, and if you've got a Karakas on the board, you can then tap it and then target your Mangara. Because Mangara gets exiled on resolution, the permanent that you targeted with Mangara will get exiled, but Mangara will get returned to your hand with Karakas. You can then replay it to form a Mangara lock on your opponent's permanents. This is a back-breaking lock, but it is very mana intensive and time intensive, so it is best used in conjunction with Aether Vial. 1/2 Aven Mind Sensor is sometimes run in this slot. It has many uses and it is often a blowout. Common uses include shutting down your opponent's fetch land, a Stoneforge Mystic, or any of Green's search abilities like Green Sun Zenith or Natural Order. 1/2 Spirit of the Labyrinth is sometimes run in the slot. She turns off your opponent's cantrips and draw spells, negating their card advantage and selection. One commonly known trick with her is to play her using your Aether Vial at instant speed in response to your opponent's brainstorm. If your opponent has already drawn their card for the turn, then that means that they will not get to draw any cards off of the brainstorm, or if they are playing it in your turn and they haven't drawn a card, they will only get to draw one card. But they still have to resolve the rest of the brainstorm, which means that they have to put 2 of the cards from their hand back on top of their library, and of course this is usually an absolute blowout for you. 1/2 Mirren Crusader is sometimes played. This doesn't provide you with any utility, but it is a very scary threat. It is usually played in bug-filled metas, and it is an amazing body to suit equipment up with. And sometimes 1/2 Brimaz King of Oroscos is sometimes run in the slot. Again, this has no utility, but it is a very terrifying threat, plus it allows you to have a go-wide strategy. And as a bonus, his 4 toughness means he isn't vulnerable to Lightning Bolt, which is of course one of the most common removal spells seen in Legacy. And those are the other creatures that commonly see play in the Death and Taxes list. Let's move on to the non-creature spells. Death and Taxes runs 4 Swords to Plowshares, one of Legacy's most efficient removal spells. And of course, Death and Taxes runs 4 Aether Vial. This is an amazing card. It lets you play your creatures at instant speed. It lets you free up your mana so that you can use it to tax your opponent's mana. Plus, it makes your creatures uncounterable. Now be prepared for smart opponents to attempt to counter Aether Vial if they get the chance. And of course then Death and Taxes fills up the rest of its slots with 3 pieces of equipment to tutor for with Stoneforge Mystic. And as I said earlier, this includes Jitte, Sword of Fire and Ice, and Batterskull. Your equipment package with Stoneforge Mystic is one of the few ways that you can gain card advantage as a Death and Taxes player. And those there are the non-land cards. Let's move on to the lands. Death and Taxes runs 23 lands and it only needs to support white. What Death and Taxes wants to do is to use its mana to disrupt its opponent's mana. That is why Aether Vial is such a key card. It runs 4 Wasteland, which will destroy the vast majority of your opponent's lands. It runs 4 Rishadan Port, an incredible land that will let you deny your opponent of any land, including a basic land. And it runs 3 Karakas. In addition to, of course, being able to bounce your own creatures to protect them from removal, you will more often be using it to bounce your opponent's legendary creatures. This makes it a fantastic card against strategies that are trying to cheat legendary creatures into play, like Sneak and Show and Reanimator. Now the one thing about Karakas is it is a legendary land itself, which is why it normally sees play as a 3-of. It runs 0 to 2 copies of Horizon Canopy. Now you might be wondering why this is in the list, especially because Death and Taxes does not use the green mana. Now you're not going to be using it for that. You're going to be using it because it can cantrip itself out if you start to flood out with mana. This is quite important for Death and Taxes, which again lacks card advantage and selection, and the life loss that you will pay for using it for its white mana is usually irrelevant. It runs 0 to 1 copies of Cavern of Souls so that you can use it to make an important creature uncounterable. It runs 0 to 1 copies of Ejandro Castle. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Now, you will run this to protect your legendary creatures from removal, such as Pyroclasm or Bolt, and the creature you'll normally be protecting is Thalia. But it is a legendary land, so it is run only as a 1-of. Death and Taxes will also run potentially 0 to 1 copies of Mishra's Factory, which acts as an efficient manland. Now, manlands are very important in Legacy as they are very strong against sweepers. And keep in mind, you can tap Mishra's Factory to give itself +1/+1 when blocking to make it a 3/3 blocker. This is why it is normally better in the Death and Taxes list to run it over Mutavault. And the rest of the slots are filled with basic planes. In a Blood Moon heavy meta, lists will normally opt to not include either either Horizon Canopy, Ejandro's Castle, or Mishra's Factory. And remember, you will usually be running a minimum of 8 planes. And so those are the common cards that see play in the main board. Let's move on to the cards that see play in the sideboard. Rest in Peace commonly sees play as it hits a ton of legacy strategies that are trying to manipulate the graveyard for value, like Dredge and Reanimator. Cataclysm is a wonderfully nasty card. You should bring it in against strategies that are trying to flood the board with either creatures or tokens, like Elves. Council's Judgment can deal with any permanent and is one of the format's only direct answer to a resolved True Name Nemesis. Containment Priest is common and sometimes seen in the main board. You should bring this in against strategies that are trying to cheat big creatures into play, like Reanimator, Elves, or Sneak and Show. Pything Needle is also played to be like another Phyrexian Revoker to deal with cards that have problematic activated abilities, like Planeswalkers. In addition, Pything Needle has the added advantage of being able to target lands with non-mana related abilities, like Maze of Ith. Sunlance is often there to act like a white lightning bolt. It can deal with lots of small, problematic creatures in Legacy, like Delver of Secrets, an opponent's Stoneforge Mystic, or infect creatures. Plus, the sideboard also often features hate bears that were considered too situational to make the main board cut, such as Aven Mind Sensor, Aethersworn Canonist, or Mangara. So those are other cards that commonly see play in the Death and Taxes sideboard. See what's in your Legacy meta and build based on that. While Death and Taxes can struggle against decks that have strategies that go off way too fast for it, such as Belch's turn 1 plays, it does have a great game against combo strategies that are turn 2 plus strategies like Sneak and Show or Ant Storm. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. And if you're watching it on YouTube, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to Magic the Gathering Kiwi's YouTube channel. And if you're watching it on Facebook, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the page. Have fun porting your way to victory.